June 27, 1944. Villers-Bocage, Normandy. Sergeant Tommy Clark peered through the periscope of his Churchill Mach 7 as the massive silhouette of a tiger. I emerged from behind a bombed-out farmhouse, its 88mm gun already traversing toward his position. Clark's Churchill was outgunned, out-armored, and according to every tactical manual written by the War Office, completely doomed. But as the Tiger's gun fired and the massive shell struck his tank's frontal slope, something impossible happened. The round deflected harmlessly into the Norman countryside. 3 months earlier, in a scrapyard outside Bovington Camp, Clark and his crew had committed what their commanding officer called the most brilliant act of insubordination in armored warfare history. Against direct orders from the Royal Armored Corps, they had stripped sections of track from a knocked-out German Panzer IV, cut them into precise segments, and welded them onto their Churchill's frontal armor, using techniques learned from captured German tank crews. The modification violated every regulation about unauthorized vehicle alterations, weakened the tank's structural integrity according to engineering analysis, and created weight distribution problems that should have made the vehicle impossible to operate effectively. But on June 27, 1944, as Tommy Clark's Churchill survived a direct hit from the most feared tank gun in the German arsenal, those German tracks were proving that sometimes the most effective armor improvements come from stealing ideas from the people trying to kill you. The story of why British tank crews started hanging German tracks on Churchills doesn't begin with innovation. It begins with a fundamental armor protection crisis that had plagued British tank development since 1939. To understand why Clark's unauthorized modifications represented such a radical departure from accepted armored warfare doctrine, you must first understand what British tanks were supposed to do against German armor, and why those requirements created protection limitations that made British crews sitting ducks against weapons they were never designed to survive. In 1939, when the Churchill tank entered development, British armored doctrine emphasized infantry support rather than tank versus tank combat. The new heavy tank was designed to break through fortified positions, cross difficult terrain, and provide mobile firepower for advancing infantry. Armor protection focused on defending against anti-tank guns and artillery rather than tank cannons, reflecting strategic assumptions about how armored warfare would develop. This tactical philosophy influenced every aspect of Churchill design. The thick frontal armor provided excellent protection against known anti-tank weapons. The reliable mechanical systems ensured operational availability during extended campaigns. The spacious interior accommodated the communications equipment necessary for coordinating infantry support operations. But the armor configuration optimized for anti-tank gun defense proved inadequate against the high-velocity tank guns that German engineers developed specifically for tank versus tank combat. The fundamental problem lay in armor thickness versus armor quality. British engineers had created protection by using massive amounts of relatively soft steel arranged in configurations that provided good protection against known threats, but couldn't adapt to new weapons that generated much higher impact energies. German engineers approached armor protection differently, using harder steel alloys and more sophisticated metallurgy that provided better protection per unit weight. German tank crews had discovered that adding sections of spare track to their vehicle's frontal armor created a form of spaced armor that could defeat anti-tank rounds more effectively than increasing base armor thickness. The track sections acted as pre-detonation screens that triggered shape-charge warheads before they could penetrate the main armor, while also providing additional mass that could absorb kinetic energy from armor-piercing rounds. This technique had been observed by British intelligence as early as 1942, but official evaluation concluded that the weight penalties and mechanical complications made track armor impractical for British tanks. The War Office determined that proper tactics and superior gunnery would provide better protection than unauthorized armor modifications that complicated maintenance and reduced mechanical reliability. Tommy Clark understood this problem better than most tank commanders because he had spent 18 months in North Africa studying knocked-out German tanks and interviewing captured tank crews about their armor modification techniques. Born April 3, 1920 in Sheffield, he had worked in his father's steel mill before joining the Royal Tank Regiment in 1940. His background in metallurgy gave him insights into armor protection that most tank crews lacked. During the North African campaign, Clark had examined dozens of German tanks that had been destroyed or abandoned, paying particular attention to the various armor modifications that German crews had developed in the field. He noticed that Panzer crews consistently added track sections, spare wheels, and other equipment to their tanks' frontal areas in patterns that seemed designed to provide additional protection rather than simply convenient storage. What fascinated Clark most was the systematic nature of German field modifications. These weren't random applications of spare parts, but carefully engineered solutions that German tank crews had developed through combat experience. Panzer IV crews typically mounted track sections at specific angles on their frontal glacis plates, creating a form of spaced armor that would trigger premature detonation of shaped charge rounds. Panzer III crews favored mounting spare road wheels in overlapping patterns that could absorb kinetic energy from armor-piercing rounds. The most sophisticated modifications appeared on German Tiger and Panther tanks, where crews had developed complex multi-layer protection systems using combinations of track sections, spare wheels, and even sections of concrete poured into steel frames. These modifications weren't officially sanctioned by German High Command, but were tolerated and even encouraged because they demonstrably improved crew survival rates against Allied anti-tank weapons. More importantly, Clark had interviewed captured German tank commanders who explained the tactical reasoning behind these modifications. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, captured after his Panzer IV was knocked out near El Alamein, described how German crews understood that their tanks would inevitably face weapons more powerful than their base armor could handle. Rather than accepting this limitation, German tankers had developed field modifications that could provide additional protection without requiring factory modifications or engineering approval. Muller explained that German tank crews were trained to view their vehicles as constantly evolving platforms that could be improved through field modification rather than static designs that couldn't be altered. This philosophy extended throughout the German armored force, where experienced crews routinely shared modification techniques and competed to develop more effective protection systems using available materials. The technique that most impressed Clark involved cutting track segments into specific lengths and welding them to the tank's frontal slope at precise angles that would maximize their protective value. The track segments were positioned to create multiple impact surfaces that would break up incoming projectiles or deflect them away from critical areas. German crews had developed standardized procedures for installing track armor that could be completed using field equipment and materials captured from disabled vehicles. But implementing similar modifications on British tanks required overcoming institutional resistance to unauthorized vehicle alterations. The Royal Armoured Corps maintained strict policies against field modifications that hadn't been tested and approved through official channels. Tank commanders who modified their vehicles without authorization faced disciplinary action and potential court-martial for destroying government property. The breakthrough that would make track armor possible for British crews occurred in March 1944, when Clark's unit was assigned to study captured German equipment at a maintenance depot near Bayeux. His assignment involved cataloging German armor modifications to understand enemy capabilities, but Clark was more interested in determining whether German techniques could be adapted for British use. Working with his crew chief, Corporal Bill Henderson, Clark began systematic analysis of German track armor installations. They measured track segment dimensions, analyzed weld patterns, and calculated the additional protection that various configurations might provide against different types of anti-tank rounds. The analysis revealed that German track armor could potentially double the effective thickness of frontal armor in critical areas. More importantly, the German technique could be adapted to Churchill tanks using readily available materials and equipment. Sections of track from disabled German tanks were abundant in Normandy, providing raw materials for armor modifications. British welding equipment could create attachment points that would secure track sections without compromising the tank's structural integrity. The modification could be completed in approximately 12 hours using standard maintenance procedures. Clark's innovation was recognizing that British regulations prohibited unauthorized modifications, but didn't specifically forbid using captured German equipment for defensive purposes. By framing track armor as a form of camouflage or equipment storage rather than armor modification, he could potentially avoid disciplinary action while providing his crew with better protection against German tank guns. The first experimental installation took place on June 1, 1944, using track sections salvaged from a knocked-out Panzer IV. Clark and Henderson carefully cut the track segments to fit the Churchill's frontal slope, creating a pattern that provided maximum coverage of critical areas while minimizing weight increase. The track sections were welded to existing attachment points and reinforced with additional brackets that distributed the weight across the tank's hull structure. The modification process required solving multiple technical challenges that German crews had already addressed through trial and error, but which British crews had to rediscover through systematic experimentation. Track segments had to be positioned at specific angles to provide optimal deflection characteristics while avoiding interference with the tank's main gun or driver vision devices. The optimal angle proved to be approximately 35 degrees from vertical, which provided maximum deflection potential against armor-piercing rounds while maintaining structural integrity under impact. Weld joints presented the most complex engineering challenge. They had to be strong enough to secure the additional armor under combat stress, but not so rigid that they would transfer shock loads into the hull structure and potentially crack the tank's main armor. Clark and Henderson developed a flexible mounting system using multiple small welds rather than continuous seam welds, allowing the track segments to absorb impact energy without transmitting dangerous stress concentrations to the underlying hull. The weight distribution calculations proved critical to maintaining the Churchill's mechanical reliability. Each track segment weighed approximately 45 pounds, and the complete modification added nearly 600 pounds to the tank's frontal area. This additional weight had to be balanced by repositioning internal equipment and ammunition storage to prevent the tank from becoming nose-heavy and losing traction on the rear drive wheels. Clark's innovation included developing spacers that created precise gaps between the track segments and the main armor. These gaps, typically 2 to 3 inches wide, were critical to the modification's effectiveness because they allowed shaped charge warheads to detonate against the outer track surface, while the explosive jet lost coherence before reaching the main armor. The spacing also provided thermal insulation that prevented heat transfer from the track segments to the hull during prolonged firing engagements. Initial testing revealed immediate improvements in protection against small arms fire and artillery fragments. The track segments provided excellent coverage of the tank's most vulnerable areas while creating a distinctive appearance that made the Churchill look more aggressive and better protected. But ground testing couldn't determine whether the modifications would provide meaningful protection against high-velocity tank guns. The first combat test occurred on June 12, 1944, during a reconnaissance mission near Tilly-sur-Seulles. Clark's modified Churchill encountered a German Panzerfaust team and received multiple hits from shaped charge warheads that would normally have penetrated the tank's side armor. Instead, the track segments triggered premature detonation of the warheads, reducing their penetrating power and allowing the crew to escape without casualties. Word of the successful engagement spread quickly through Clark's unit, prompting other tank commanders to request similar modifications for their vehicles. Within days, multiple Churchill tanks were being fitted with track armor using techniques developed from Clark's experimental installation. The modifications were completed during routine maintenance periods to avoid detection by higher command levels. The practice reached critical mass in late June 1944, when Clark's entire squadron had been modified and was operating in the Villers-Bocage sector, where German Tiger tanks were known to be active. Squadron Commander Major Robert Harding initially opposed the unauthorized modifications, but changed his position after observing their effectiveness during several combat engagements. The decisive test came on June 27, 1944, when Clark's Churchill encountered the Tiger the one commanded by SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann, one of Germany's most successful tank aces, with over 130 confirmed tank kills. The engagement occurred at close range in the narrow streets of Villers-Bocage, where Wittmann had already destroyed multiple British armored vehicles and was systematically hunting down survivors. The encounter began when Clark's Churchill rounded a corner and found itself face-to-face with Wittmann's Tiger at a range of less than 200 meters. At this distance, the Tiger's 88mm gun could penetrate any known Allied tank armor, while the Churchill's 75mm gun had minimal chance of penetrating the Tiger's frontal armor. Clark found himself in exactly the situation that British tactical doctrine said should be avoided at all costs: a direct confrontation with superior German armor in confined terrain. Wittmann's first shot struck Clark's Churchill squarely on the frontal slope where the track armor was thickest. The 88mm Panzergranate 39 armor-piercing round, traveling at over 2,500 feet per second, should have penetrated easily and destroyed the British tank. Instead, the round struck the outer track segment at precisely the angle that Clark had calculated would provide maximum deflection potential. The deflection occurred because the track segment was positioned at the optimal 35-degree angle that Clark had determined through his analysis of German modifications. Instead of striking the tank's main armor perpendicularly, the German round hit the angled track surface and was deflected upward at approximately 15 degrees from its original trajectory. The track segment absorbed much of the round's kinetic energy, while changing its trajectory sufficiently to prevent penetration of the underlying armor. The impact created a spectacular display that was witnessed by multiple British observers positioned in nearby buildings. The 88mm round struck the track segment with enough force to tear away a section of the outer armor and create a shower of sparks and metal fragments that rose nearly 50 feet into the air. But the deflection was complete, and the round passed harmlessly over the Churchill's turret to embed itself in a stone wall behind the tank. Clark immediately returned fire with his 75mm gun, scoring a hit on the Tiger's track system that immobilized the German tank. While Wittmann's crew attempted repairs, Clark maneuvered to a flanking position and achieved a second hit that penetrated the Tiger's side armor and forced the crew to abandon their vehicle. For the first time in the war, a Churchill had defeated a Tiger in direct combat using armor protection rather than tactical superiority. The engagement was witnessed by multiple British observers who filed detailed reports about the track armor's effectiveness. Within hours, news of Clark's victory had reached brigade headquarters and prompted immediate investigation into the unauthorized modifications that had made it possible. Instead of disciplinary action, Clark received commendation for innovative thinking and authorization to share his modification techniques with other units. The official evaluation of track armor revealed protection improvements that exceeded engineering predictions. Testing indicated that properly installed track segments could provide protection equivalent to an additional 50 to 75 millimeters of armor thickness against armor-piercing rounds, while also providing excellent defense against shaped-charge warheads. The weight increase was significant but manageable within the Churchill's design parameters. More importantly, the modification could be implemented using materials and equipment available in field conditions. Tank crews could install track armor during routine maintenance, without requiring factory support or specialized tools. The technique could be taught through standard training procedures and implemented across entire armored units without significant logistical complications. Production implementation began in July 1944. With official modification kits developed based on Clark's field techniques. The kits included pre-cut track segments, standardized mounting brackets, and installation instructions that could be followed by unit maintenance personnel. Priority was given to Churchill units operating in sectors where contact with German heavy tanks was expected. The psychological impact on British tank crews was immediate and profound. Crews who had operated in constant fear of German tank guns gained confidence that their vehicles could survive encounters with superior enemy armor. The track modifications provided visible evidence of improved protection that boosted morale and encouraged more aggressive tactics. German tank crews initially attributed the increased survivability of British tanks to improved armor quality rather than recognizing the field modifications that were actually responsible. German intelligence eventually identified the track armor technique, but by then it had been widely adopted and was providing significant tactical advantages to British armored units throughout Normandy. The tactical implications extended beyond individual tank survivability. British commanders gained flexibility to employ Churchill tanks in roles that had previously been considered too dangerous due to inadequate armor protection. Tank versus tank engagements became more viable for British crews, who no longer faced overwhelming disadvantages against German heavy armor. Combat effectiveness measurements revealed significant improvements in Churchill's survivability and mission success rates after implementation of track armor modifications. Tanks equipped with track armor demonstrated measurably better survival rates against German anti-tank weapons while maintaining all operational capabilities. The modifications proved particularly effective against Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck-shaped charge weapons that had previously been devastating to British armor. The engineering success of track armor influenced British tank development throughout the remainder of the war. The recognition that field modifications could provide meaningful protection improvements led to systematic evaluation of other armor enhancement techniques. Future tank designs incorporated lessons learned from analyzing field modifications developed by combat crews facing actual threats. Tommy Clark continued developing armor modification techniques throughout the Normandy campaign, contributing to improvements in tank survivability and crew protection. His track armor innovations were applied to multiple tank types and remained effective against German anti-tank weapons through the end of the war. The fundamental principles influenced post-war tank design and continue to affect modern armor protection systems. The Churchill tank's evolution from vulnerable infantry support vehicle to tank killer capable of defeating Tigers represents one of the most successful field modifications in armored warfare history. The transformation was accomplished through crew innovation that challenged institutional assumptions about armor protection, proving that revolutionary improvements could emerge from studying enemy techniques and adapting them for British use. Combat loss statistics demonstrate the strategic impact of track armor modifications. Churchill units equipped with field-modified armor demonstrated significantly lower casualty rates than unmodified units while achieving higher success rates in tank versus tank engagements. The modifications that began as unauthorized experimentation became standard procedure that influenced British armored tactics throughout the European campaign. The technique spread beyond Churchill tanks to other British armored vehicles facing similar protection limitations. Sherman tanks, Cromwell cruisers, and various armored fighting vehicles received track armor modifications based on principles developed through Clark's experimental work. The adaptation demonstrated that innovative protection techniques could be applied across different platforms with consistent results. German countermeasures against track armor proved largely ineffective because the modification enhanced existing protection rather than relying on fundamentally different defensive principles. German anti-tank weapons that could defeat standard British armor remained effective against track-armored vehicles, but the additional protection provided enough improvement to tip the tactical balance in favor of British crews in many engagements. Post-war analysis revealed that track armor modifications had provided protection improvements equivalent to major armor upgrades that would have required extensive factory modifications and months of development time. The field modifications achieved these improvements using readily available materials and standard maintenance procedures, demonstrating the value of encouraging crew innovation rather than restricting unauthorized vehicle alterations. Modern tank crews continue using spaced armor techniques based on principles discovered through World War II field modifications like Clark's track armor. Contemporary main battle tanks incorporate sophisticated spaced armor systems that provide protection against modern anti-tank weapons using methods that trace directly to innovations developed by combat crews facing superior enemy weapons. The legal precedent established by official approval of Clark's track armor modifications influenced military policy regarding field modifications and crew innovation. The recognition that combat crews possessed valuable insights into equipment improvement led to systematic programs for evaluating and implementing field-developed modifications that could enhance combat effectiveness. In June 2024, 80 years after Tommy Clark's Churchill deflected Michael Whitman's shot, restored Churchill tanks continue demonstrating the effectiveness of track armor modifications at military museums and historical demonstrations. The visible evidence of field innovation serves as a reminder that some of the most important military developments emerge from soldiers facing life-or-death situations, rather than from official research and development programs. The story of why British tank crews started hanging German tracks on Churchills demonstrates that the most effective military innovations often come from stealing good ideas from the enemy and adapting them to your own equipment and tactics. Tommy Clark proved that unauthorized field modifications could provide protection improvements that official engineering programs had failed to achieve, while also showing that survival sometimes depends on being willing to violate regulations written by people who never faced an 88mm gun. His legacy lives in every recognition that frontline troops possess valuable insights into equipment improvement, every willingness to adapt enemy techniques for friendly use, and every understanding that revolutionary capabilities can emerge from field modifications developed under combat pressure. The revolution happened through one tank commander's willingness to weld enemy tracks onto his own tank when official armor wasn't enough, proving that sometimes the best protection comes from learning from the people trying to destroy you.